Hi, I'm Jake Warner. I'm Cycle's CEO and founder. For those of you who are new to Cycle, Cycle's a low ops platform built for simplifying a lot of the processes around DevOps for DevOps and engineering teams. Today we're going to deploy a super basic Git repo to Cycle, and that Git repo has a Dockerfile inside of it, which we'll dive into in a minute. But the whole idea here is that if you wanted to get started with Cycle with like a Git ops process, this would be one of the more foundational components of that. So let's dive in. So with Cycle, this is our portal. You'll see over here we have images. Images are very simply the underlying containers that we're going to run, right? So we can jump over to sources and we'll create a new source. So a source in Cycle is simply us telling Cycle where we can actually find, whether it's the build files for a container or a container image that has already been built. So whether you want to pull in a container image from Docker Hub, Docker Registry, or an OCI compliant registry, you have those options. But for today, we're going to do an actual build off of a Dockerfile directly. So I chose Dockerfile. I'm going to jump over to the Git repo. Again, this is a Git repo that one of our engineers built last year, you can see. And it's just a super basic example. So we'll come up here. We'll copy the location of this Git repo. And again, this is just a public repo, so it doesn't really, there's no authorization or setup on it. So we'll jump over here, paste in these credentials. It is using the main branch, as you can see here. The context directory we'll leave empty. For build file, that's where we can define where the actual Docker file is. Maybe you have a nest Docker file within this repo, but in this example, the Docker file is sitting here in the root of the repo. So we'll specify that. We don't need to reference any specific tags or hashes. We're just doing a super basic example. And as I've already mentioned, there's no authentication setup for this repo. So we'll go ahead, we'll create this image source. And as I already alluded to, this image source just tells Cycle where we can actually find the actual container that we want to, in this case, build. So we'll go ahead and click import. That will take probably about 10-ish seconds to do. While that's importing, we'll jump back over to the Git repo. For those of you who are new to containers, a traditional container, or at least in the variety of containers today, most containers originate from a Docker file. So if we jump into this Docker file, you can see that this Docker file has two stages. And when I say stages, you can notice those by the from command. So we have one stage and a second stage. And the reason to have multiple stages in this example is in this first stage, we're doing all the builds, and then in the second and final stage is where we're actually serving the container. And the reason for this is, again, maybe you want to have your dependencies and your build files all separated from the final production build that you're going to serve to your users. And so this is a very basic example of that. We're doing all of our build up here, and then we're ending with this path in the first stage that is /app/build. We're going to copy from that builder, and we're going to run it. We're going to insert it into the final stage at this location. And this final location is just a super basic Nginx container using the Alpine variant of that. So if we jump back over to Cycle, we can see that we have our image has been imported. It's 41 megs in size, which is a complete overkill for what we're doing, but whatever. That's a story for a different day. To actually go ahead and deploy that container, let's jump over into environments. And if you're unfamiliar with environments, you can think of them as like a global VPC. So these environments, like for example, this demo environment, while it's on our production cluster, it's sharing the same infrastructure as this RabbitMQ and this load balancer environment. But even though it's sharing that infrastructure, it is unable to communicate with those instances. It is in its own environment, right? So let's jump into this demo environment. We're going to deploy a container. We'll give it a name. We'll just say this is our getting started container. It is stateless. It has no data that we care about. It's not going to generate any data. Let's say we want to run 2 copies, and let's make it highly available. Again, super overkill for this example, but whatever, we'll go with it. We'll choose recent images. We'll choose our getting started image that we just imported. There we go. Normally we can set this to be publicly accessible or not, but again, this is a very basic example. So we're just going to keep it as disabled. in terms of public network access, and we'll just deploy this container. You'll see here that we have 2 instances of it. The cycle created. One is over on Vultr and one is over on AWS. This is infrastructure that we had already deployed prior to this video. And if we go ahead and start these, we'll see them start. Obviously, the first start will take the longest because we actually need to download the image to the proper compute server that it's going to run on. But here we go. We have our application. And yeah, that's all it is to deploy a super basic application that is in a Git repo to cycle. If you have any questions, we'd love to talk. We have a Slack community, slack.cycle.io. We'd encourage you to reach out, and yeah, let's chat.